video today. We have actually, yesterday, went to visit a friend. She didn't know that she was a friend, but she turned out being a pretty good friend. Well, first time we met each other, but I went to look at some canning jars she had, and while I was there on the property, we ended up in one amazing chanterelle bed. During this video, you're going to have to ignore the dogs. They're fixing to be barking. Hey, I got dogs outside, so big deal. Who cares? But we got into a good chanterelle bed yesterday, and I introduced chanterelle mushrooms to Stacy, and she really liked them. And I'm doing this video to help her in one of the preservation methods that I use to preserve my chanterelles, which is canning. I can a lot of chanterelles. They do really good can. So, you know, I also dehydrate them. I've done real good with that. But if anybody wants to watch this video, everybody's welcome to. But I'm doing this video just to show whoever's interested on how I go through the process of canning these chanterelle mushrooms, so that anybody else can do it. So, without any further ado, I'm fixing to get started. One of the first things I'm going to do here is I've already washed a few jars. I really don't know how many jars I'm going to need, but I've got 3, 4, 5. I'm probably going to need a couple more by the time I get done. But I've got 5 jars that's ready washed. I'm fixing to preheat this oven. I'm going to preheat this oven to about 250 degrees. What I'm going to do is I've got a baking sheet right there. I'm going to put these jars in here. I've got some more clean jars back here. I'll be right back. I've got some plain half-pint jars. And we're going to use some of these. I'd rather put them in half-pint jars. A quart or a pint of mushrooms is quite a lot of mushrooms. So when you're making a big old pot of spaghetti or chili or anything else you put mushrooms in, a pint of mushrooms is a lot of mushrooms. So you really got to love mushrooms. You need a pint at one time. And I do. I love mushrooms. It's no big trick for me to eat a pint. Obviously you can tell. But I'm just letting you guys know, if you have half-pint jars available, you would like that size better for the average person. Now, I've got that on 250 degrees. What I'm doing, I'm preheating them jars. We're going to, after we get these mushrooms cleaned up and washed up, we're going to put them in a pot and cook them. Well, the reason we're heating our jars up in the oven, if you take hot mushrooms and put them in a cold jar, you're going to bust your jar. So, to prevent that, we're just going to go ahead and preheat our jars. And it's not really that difficult to maneuver around with hot jars. It's no big deal. And then when you transfer the liquid over to the jars, it's safe, and then there is no busted jar. So, you can boil your jars and heat them up that way and use them. A lot of people have boiled their jars, and it works just as good either way. I have not ever had any trouble either direction. So with that said, here's our pot that we're going to put our mushrooms in. And then comes the mushroom. By the way, guys, I will say this. If you're going to be doing this like I am, you're going to need one of these screens for your sink, because you're going to have mushroom particles and stuff in here, and if you ain't careful, they'll go down into your drain. You don't want to plug your drain up. You need a trash trap, so to speak, right there. But here we go. We have got some really beautiful chanterelles. We got into, look here, a beautiful bed of these things. And they're in their prime. Look how big that mushroom is. It's gorgeous. And it's in the perfect prime of its cycle. So we have really got some food right here. And these are pretty expensive mushrooms if you go and bought these things. These are really expensive mushrooms. I'm really thankful that I was given permission to get this growth of mushrooms. And I'm very thankful and appreciate her so much for allowing us to do this. I mean, this is a beautiful bunch of mushrooms. And I can already smell these things. They're kind of fruity. And there's some more. They kind of smell apricot-like. So here we go. We're going to be transferring. We're going to be washing these. I try to use warm water. I don't want a lot of hot water on them. Wash that off. Go ahead and them little pieces, put that in the pot. These places right here where they just touch the ground, you can scrape it with your thumbnail and stuff and try to get that clean, but it never does really come clean. So what I do is I take a pair of scissors. This is my favorite kitchen utensil. I'll take a pair of scissors and I'll clip the end off right there. And then I just start clipping it to length, whatever length I want, into the pot once it's clean. I don't want to use hot water, so if my water gets a little hot there, I'll turn it down. And then we just got to sit here and clean all these mushrooms up the same way. Just cut that dirt bulb off right at the root system. And then cut the mushroom up. I know a lot of people's got their method and their way of doing things, and none of them wrong. So whatever suits you, whatever feels right, do it. However long you want the pieces, or if you want to just throw the whole thing in there and try to pickle, or can the whole mushroom, it's your mushroom. Do what you want to with them. I just like the pieces. Well, they fry good too. If you've got a mess of real fresh ones like this right here, you can roll them in egg and batter them up and fry them, and they make good fried mushrooms. So, but this is how I preserve them. When I got way under more than I can eat by frying them fresh and eating them fresh on salads and things. This is how I preserve them, and that's what I'm trying to show you guys what I do. You may not like it, and you may know a better way, and that's great. But this is what I do, because this is the way we've always done it. I actually found a couple of these. Let me see in my finder if you can see this really well. This is not a chanterelle. This is in fact what's referred as a black trumpet. Black trumpets are the best tasting mushroom in the world. They are very rare to find, but when you do find them, you have truly found something very delicious. I only found a couple this morning, and I went ahead and tossed them in this bag. I'm fixing to go ahead and slice them up and put them with the chanterelles, but let me tell you, if you see these little dudes in the woods, you really want to get them. because they are fantastic. Matter of fact, I can them as well. I do dehydrate them. They dehydrate good. But I've canned a lot of black trumpets this year. As a matter of fact, this has been the best year for black trumpets I've ever seen. So keep a lookout for them little dudes. They look just like the leaves when you're in the woods. If you ain't careful, you'll miss these. But them things are awesome. To do a lot of shrinking when we start cooking it down. We cook it on the stovetop deliberately so that it will shrink. If you put it in your jars like this and then pressure can them, these will shrink in the jars and you'll end up with that much mushrooms in the bottom of the jar and the rest of it will be broth. So we do the pre-cook on the top, on the stovetop, so that the shrinking gets done before we put them in the jars. I tried to put just enough water in here to be, it's not floating, it's still on the bottom. We'll put some water in this one. We need about half this pot of water.
Okay.
We got about half this pot of water on this much mushroom, so that when this cooks down, it'll even out pretty good. So let's go to the stove top. Okay, I'm fixing to add some salt to these pots right now. I'm fixing to go ahead and turn this eye here on high, and this front eye here. Let me get this little pressure cooker out of our way. I'm fixing to turn this eye here on high, so we can get these to heating up. I'm fixing to dash some kosher salt in these. I like Morton's brand of kosher salt. You can use anybody's, but this brand works really good for me. I don't like putting iodized salt in my jars. I like pickling salt or kosher salt. Works really good. You want the preservative properties of that salt. Heck, don't ask me how much I put in there. I've been doing it so long that I know basically about how much I want in there. When these cook down and get closer to done on the stovetop, I can actually do a taste test, and if it needs a little more salt, I'll add some more salt. But I know about how much salt is in the mix by the way I taste it. So don't over salt it. You can always add salt later. If you over salt it, then it's just over salty. So don't over salt it. Put some good salt in this much mushrooms. Less salt, obviously, if there's less mushrooms. So let's let this sit and start heating, start cooking down. Go ahead and put the tops on these things. They do better with the tops on. And we'll set that and let that go for a minute. Okay, now our mushrooms have been cooking for 20 minutes. You heard our timer go off. So now what I want to do is pull me a piece of these, one of these, out of this pot, blow on it. And I want to eat this. That pot needs a little more salt in it. I don't have enough salt. You gotta have adequate salt because your salt is part of your preservation properties to preserve your mushrooms. So don't freak you out. I know that's looked like a lot of salt. It wasn't as much as it looked like. This is a big pot and a whole lot of mushrooms. Stir that salt in good. You want to get good and dissolved. Now I want to pour me out another little piece. That's getting pretty close. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more salt. And we're going to call that one done. That's enough to preserve them. You don't have to over salt them to preserve them. If you salt them to taste, to where you would like, what you would normally like as a taste, that's usually getting pretty close on these. Now some things do require more salt, but I've never had an issue with these salting them to taste. But being as I got another pot, I've got to taste test this one too. It's not bad, but it needs a little more salt itself. Get it the way I need it. Yeah, that's good. If I can get these like that, then I will be happy. Yeah, I'm good. We're good on them now. Okay, now then, we're fixing to start the canning process to put these up and preserve them. Remember, we've got our jars in here preheated. I hope I heated enough jars. This is quite a bit of mushrooms. Off. Okay. But now we got to set up our pressure canner on the stove, because you remember we cooked these down. We had to heat the jars because if I put hot material in a cold jar, it would bust the jar. Now we're fixing to be putting hot material in a hot jar. If I put it in a cold pressure cooker, you're still going to bust your jar and all of your food is going to fall out in the pot full of glass. So at this point, I'm going to have to move these pots a little bit and go get my pressure cooker. I'm going to take the lid off that rascal for a moment. I'm going to put water in this. Now, a lot of people make mistakes. See, we're putting jars about this tall down in here. They come up to about right here. And a lot of people make the mistake of really overfilling these pressure cookers with water. It takes forever to get them up to temperature, and then it takes forever to get them up to pressure. This jar does not need this much water up it or this much water up it. If you get that water level to about here, that's all the water you need in that pot. You do not need to fill this pot up with water. So I'm going to put water in this pot. And I have a little bit of water in the bottom of this pot. I did not need that much water because once I start adding jars into this pot, they're going to start displacing water, and there's going to end up more water in the pot than what it looks like now. But that will be sufficient. That's all the water that you need to pressure cook these mushrooms, or just about anything. You don't need that much water. I'm going to go ahead and get this turned on here without the top, because that allows that water to start heating up, so that when we start getting our jars full, we can put our jars, hot jars, in hot water, and they won't be so much of a temperature difference where it'll crack and bust the glass. So you got to remember, when you're doing this, it's not that difficult. When you get in the swing of canning, it's a ball, it's fun. But once you get in the swing of it, you start remembering, oh, that's cold and this is hot. You know, it's not a good mix. So.
Cold with cold with cold, hot with hot with hot.
Yeah. Anywhere you can buy canning products, Walmart or anywhere else, you can find funnels like this. They're canning funnels. I really highly suggest you get one if you don't have one. These are really good for filling these jars and save a lot of food and a lot of spilling. Alright. These jars has been in here for at 250 degrees. They're hot, so be careful.
Don't set them on the cold countertop.
Don't do as I do. You know, I've been a welder for years. Don't do as I do. If you can't handle touching these hot glass jars with your bare hands, get you some oven mitts or something. You know, use a little common sense. I've been doing this for a while. Alright. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to swap this to this eye.
That's the big hot eye.
So that I've got the room to fill jars over here. What is that thing? Look like an ashtray.
Spoon rest.
Alright. So, I've got my jar, got my funnel,
Got your mushrooms.
and I got the mushrooms. Right now, we're not going to add the mushroom broth. We're just adding the mushrooms so that we can get mushrooms evenly divided throughout our jars.
Want me to bring you the towel to set things on?
Yeah, I need a towel. You do not want to put too much in these jars. I'll go ahead and hold it like this so I can show you what I'm doing. This jar's got to have headspace in it. If you do not leave enough headspace, it will not seal properly, and it will come unsealed, and your food will spoil. You have to leave headspace. Now this jar's well packed, and when we add our broth, we're going to add our broth right up to about here, just over our mushroom level. But we don't want to take up our headspace probably between this thread and your flat seal. Alright, so make sure you got a air space between the top of the broth and that seal. Otherwise you're going to have some serious problems when it comes to this. Is a lot of pots, a lot of pressure cookers, it's got these little grids that sit in the bottom, and they hold your jars up off the bottom of the pot, so that if the jar sits flat on the bottom, it collects air bubbles under it when it starts boiling, and it chatters a little bit, and the jars will shake. Sometimes it will cause little issues. But if the jars are sitting on something like this, then the air doesn't develop beneath the jar, and it makes it a lot smoother canning process. So you can go ahead and put that in your canner at this point. This jar here, I've added broth to it. I put the broth up to about here. Let me go ahead and see if you can tell. That looks good. Alright, that's about where I put the broth when I add the broth into that jar. And then you take a paper towel. Take a paper towel and wipe the edge of that jar with a paper towel to get away any particles that'll sit between that edge and the seal. See, these flaps are your seals. Your seal, that's rubber right in there. Alright? And when you're pressure cooking, this is going to get hot and it's going to seal against the rim of that glass jar. So if anything gets in here, it could potentially cause a problem in the final seal that you don't want. So put the lid on your jar. Don't crank them down super tight. Just get them finger tight. It's no big deal. See how tight that is? After you pull them back out of the pot, then you can, and our water's getting pretty warm in here by now. So now that we have our water warmed up, I don't have to be real careful about putting that in. So we're good there. So when we pull them out, we can tighten the lids up for the final tighten. And they never get real super tightened up. But anyway, let's get filling some more jars. Now what I'm doing here now is you'll notice that not a whole lot of mushroom in that. It's thinner than what I was doing. It's more broth than it is anything. When you start getting thin on mushrooms in your pot, it's a good idea to just go ahead and just use what few pieces you got left between a few jars. We're going to not throw any of this broth away. You do not want to waste this broth. This is fantastic soup base. You can use it to make a mushroom soup or any kind of chicken soups or any kind of soup. It makes a fantastic soup base. You can also use it and make mushroom gravy out of for your mashed potatoes that is dynamite. So this is still, even though you're getting low on mushrooms, a lot of food in the broth. Now, in the pressure cooker, we're about to get full here. What we have got out of these mushrooms that you've seen us can this evening: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pints of mushrooms, plus 3 half pints.
4 plus the one in your hand.
Well, this is not mushrooms. This is mushroom broth. These are mushrooms. All right, we got 10 and a half pints of mushrooms out of that batch of mushrooms. I'm going to go ahead and slide this in, and this is the broth. And we've got them packed in pretty doggone snug at this point. At this point, it's time to put the lid on. Now, when you get into pressure canning, you learn that depends on what you're pressure cooking and what altitude you're at as to how much pressure you need. Right now, I'm in Alabama. If I was home in Tennessee, I would be needing 15 pounds of pressure because I'm a lot higher. Here in Alabama, I only need 10 pounds of pressure. This particular pressure cooker has got a real neat little ring system. If this is empty, then you have 5 pounds of pressure. And if you slide one ring on, that's 10 pounds of pressure. And if you put the next ring on top of it, then now you have 15 pounds on your jiggler. This jiggler is what regulates the pressure inside this pot and how much pressure is in this pot. Now that we can turn our heat all the way up at the moment so that this thing can start building pressure. And it shouldn't take long to get started. When it starts building pressure, you'll notice this knob pop up because this is a safety. When this pops up, it's locked on. There's pressure in the pot. You need to follow extreme safety precautions messing with these things. I'm cooking these mushrooms on 10 pounds of pressure, and they're going to be on 10 pounds of pressure for 45 minutes. And while we're doing that, I'm fixing to go ahead and be putting this broth in quart-sized jars to use as soup bases. So, when this gets up to pressure, we'll turn our timer on to 45 minutes. You notice this thing here trying to bump up already? It's because it's already building pressure in there. When this pops up, then you know that you've started the pressure building process. see this thing starting to dance, that lets you know that the pressure in that pot has now reached 10 pounds of pressure. And this, as long as this thing is dancing, it's not going to exceed 10 pounds of pressure. At this point, we start our timer. These mushrooms need to pressure cook at 10 pounds for 45 minutes. Now we have a 45-minute timer set. Some things take longer than 45 minutes, especially if you're canning meat. If you're canning meat, you put it on for an hour and a half. You put it on for 90 minutes. Certain vegetables, and there's a lot of good information out there on canning and the pH level and the acidic level of the things that you're actually working with. These mushrooms will do fine at 45 minutes on 10 pounds of pressure. So now that this thing is jiggling, I can back off the heat on my eye. Alright, now as long as the jiggler is still jiggling, it can slow down, but you don't want it to stop because it'll get under pressure. So what we'll do is we start backing our heat off a little bit at a time. I'm going to go on down to number 7 here instead of high and see if it continues. If it continues jiggling, then I might move it on down a little bit, and it depends on how slow it's moving. But if you get so low that it stops, don't panic. Just turn it back up a little bit and it'll start back up. And that's where you need it. That's your equilibrium on it. Alright, so right now it's dancing really good. I'm just going to go ahead and pull it down to 6 and see if we can maintain the jiggle at 6. We may even go on further down than that, who knows. But right now, that's a really good. We're cooking. We're preserving now. Okay, now this thing's been going for 45 minutes. Our timer's went off. We can shut the heat source down. At this point, you cannot open this pot. If you manage to get this pot open, it would belch every bit of the water in this pot in your lap, on your belly, down the front of you. It would burn you up. You cannot try to open this pot yet. As long as this knob's sticking up, this is your safety. You can't open this pot till this thing falls down. It will fall down on its own. Do not pick this up to relieve the pressure. If you pick this up right now and turn all that steam loose through the port, believe me, you can belch everything that's in these jars out into the pot. Don't ask me how I know. Do not pick this thing here up. You have to let it set and cool for a while. You got two options. At this point, if it's late in the night, you can go to bed. In the morning, you can get up, you can take this loose, take the lid off, set the jars out, they'll be sealed, and they'll be ready to go. At this, right now, I'm fixing to wait several minutes, probably 35 to 40 minutes. At which point I'll check this jiggler. If the pressure has got low enough, I can remove this jiggler and relieve the pressure until this button falls down in place. So I'll be back in about 35-40 minutes. We'll see where we're at. And if I can remove the jiggler and then get these jars out of this pot, I've got 3.5, nearly 4 quarts of mushroom broth that I have got to run as soon as I can get this unloaded. So let's give it 35 or 40 minutes. We'll come back and see where we're at. Alright? Talk to you later. Okay, everybody, as you've noticed, I have already removed the jiggler. It was there. I came back and this pot, this button, see now, is down. That means the pressure has released a bit. You pick the jiggler up. There's no steam coming out of this port. If there was steam there, I couldn't hold my hand there, I promise. It would be hot. So, there's no steam coming out of the port. This button's down, so we should be safe. Although this is still hot. It's not been an overnight trip or nothing. It's been a few minutes. It should be safe to take this top off. But now, when we do, be really careful. Do not pull this front up, or the steam that's in this pot is going to hit you in the face. And that does not feel good. It will burn your forehead up. So pick it up from the back. See all that steam come out? This is superheated water. When you put water under pressure, then it absorbs more heat. That's why it's such a good preservation method, is because the water gets so much hotter and it takes more temperature for it to boil. If you'll notice, this is still boiling in the jar. Now this is fixing to settle here in a minute, but this, when this seals, this seal right here will suck down. You'll hear it pop. And it'll be sealed. And after it does that, these mushrooms will last in this can on the cabinet shelf for 10 plus years. They will last a long time. I have eaten things that have been canned for 20, 25 years, and it's still just as good as the day it was put in. Canning is a very good method. So we're going to set these out. One button already popped. You can hear them pop when they pop. There goes another button. There's another. That one popped inside the can before I could get it out. Alright guys, all these are going to seal. There'll be more of them pop. There went another one. That one, that there ain't too far from popping. And when them cools down, you just tighten the bands up, rinse the bottles off just to keep them sanitized. And that is how that I preserve my chanterelle mushrooms when I can them. May be better methods out there, but this works good for me. And I love that sound when they're popping. But this works good for me. And I've had good success with it. Them's good mushrooms. They'll go in anything you put mushrooms in. And I hope this has been a fun video for you to watch as it was for us to make. We've enjoyed it, had a good time. So, thank you again.